In the ruined fields of northern Britain, in the midst of the distinct magnificence of wild heather and moving slopes, lay Thornfield Corridor, a chateau covered in secret and despairing. It was here that Jane Eyre, a young lady of flexibility and elegance, set out on an excursion that would perpetually entwine her destiny with that of Edward Rochester, a man tortured by his past. Jane Eyre was a vagrant, brought up in the severe climate of Gateshead by her brutal auntie, Mrs. Reed. Notwithstanding the brutality of her childhood, Jane's soul stayed whole. Her break came as Lowood School, where she persevered through additional difficulty yet additionally tracked down kinship and reason. As she developed, Jane turned into a tutor, a decent situation for a lady of her unassuming means. It was this occupation that carried her to Thornfield Lobby, where she would administer the youthful ward, Adele Varens. Thornfield Lobby, with its stupendous yet bleak veneer, appeared to be a position of mysteries. Jane's manager, Mr. Rochester, was a perplexing figure. From their most memorable gathering, whenever an opportunity experience on a hazy path prompted Jane helping him after a tumble from his pony, there was a substantial association between them. Rochester, with his agonizing disposition and penetrating eyes, appeared to see into the actual soul of Jane, and she, thusly, was charmed by his complicated person. Jane and Rochester's relationship developed through a progression of experiences, each noteworthy a greater amount of their inward lives. Rochester, fascinated by Jane's trustworthiness and acumen, frequently looked for her organization, participating in profound, philosophical discussions. Jane, however careful, wound up attracted to his mind and the weakness that infrequently looked through his harsh outside. One night, as a tempest seethed outside, Rochester trusted in Jane about his grieved past. He discussed an energetic tactlessness in France, bringing about the introduction of Adele, and the underhanded idea of his previous darling. Jane tuned in, her heart hurting for the aggravation Rochester had persevered. At that time, underneath the glinting candlelight, their association extended, becoming something more significant than simple fellowship. Regardless of their developing bond, Jane stayed mindful of the immense social gorge between them. Rochester was a well-off, common man, while she was a straightforward tutor. Yet, love, as it frequently does, ignores such hindrances. One twilight evening, Rochester uncovered his affections for Jane, announcing his adoration and requesting her hand in marriage. Jane, overpowered with satisfaction and mistrust, acknowledged, her heart taking off with the commitment of a future loaded up with adoration and friendship. Their joy, notwithstanding, was brief. On their big day, as they remained before the special raised area, a voice interfered with the function, uncovering a dull mystery. Rochester was at that point wedded. His significant other, Bertha Bricklayer, a lady headed to frenzy, was stowed away in the storage room of Thornfield Lobby. The disclosure broke Jane's reality. In spite of Rochester's frantic supplications, Jane couldn't spurn her ethical standards. She escaped Thornfield, her terrible with each step she detracted from the man she cherished. Jane's process drove her to the home of the Waterways kin, where she tracked down asylum and a recharged feeling of direction. St. John Waterways, a harsh however generous pastor, offered her a situation as a town teacher. Jane, however appreciative, couldn't fail to remember Rochester. She felt his non-appearance like a ghost appendage, a hurt that wouldn't die down. In spite of St. John's proposition of marriage and an existence of minister work in India, Jane couldn't focus on an association without affection. One evening, as she remained at the edge of a precipice, the breeze whipping her hair, Jane heard a voice calling out to her. It was weak, very nearly a murmur conveyed by the breeze, yet undeniably Rochester's. She felt a baffling inclination to get back to Thornfield, a force that rose above reason and rationale. Directed by this instinct, Jane advanced back, driven by an expectation she tried not name. Upon her return, Jane tracked down Thornfield Corridor in ruins, a skeletal leftover of its previous greatness. She discovered that a fire had consumed the house set by the disturbed Bertha, who died in the flares. Rochester, in his bold endeavor to save his significant other, had been unfortunately harmed. He made do, yet at extraordinary expense, losing his sight and a hand. Jane's heart throbbed for the man she found at Ferndean, a far-off house where Rochester currently resided in confinement. In spite of his actual disabilities, Rochester's soul stayed whole. At the point when Jane entered his life again, he was at first distrusting, then wrecked with feeling. Her return brought a light into his murkiness, an expectation he had thought lost for eternity. Their get-together was a demonstration of the persevering through force of adoration. Jane's relentless commitment and Rochester's lowered heart manufactured a bond significantly more grounded than previously. They wedded in a tranquil, sincere function, encompassed by the excellence of nature that had consistently reflected the profundity of their feelings. In the years that followed, Jane and Rochester found comfort and happiness in one another. Rochester's sight to some extent returned, permitting him to witness the essence of their firstborn child. Their life, however set apart by preliminaries, was rich with affection and common regard. Jane's excursion from vagrant to dearest spouse, from a position of gloom to one of trust, was a demonstration of her flexibility and the extraordinary force of affection. Consequently, in the midst of the wild fields and the murmuring breezes, Jane Eyre and Edward Rochester experienced their days, limited by an affection that had endured the fiercest of tempests and arisen all the more grounded for it. Their story, an encouraging sign, keeps on moving the people who put stock in the unstoppable soul of the human heart and the persevering through force of genuine romance.